You're watching Story Scroll. Real stories, raw emotions, and endings you'll never forget. Let's scroll into today's tale.
Did my parent ever value my life, or was I just convenient? I don't really know how to start this without sounding dramatic, which is part of the problem and probably why it took me this long to write anything at all. A few weeks ago, I was in a car accident. Nothing headline-worthy, but serious enough that my car was totaled and I ended up in the ER with a concussion, bruised ribs, and a doctor who kept repeating, "You're lucky." I remember sitting there under those harsh hospital lights, phone buzzing in my hand, trying to decide whether I was allowed to call my parent. That alone should probably tell you something. When I finally did, their reaction wasn't panic or concern. It wasn't even annoyance in a normal human way. They sighed and said, "Well, at least you weren't the one who died." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do. They said it so casually, like they were commenting on the weather. No follow-up questions. No, "Are you okay?" Just a pause, and then, "How bad is the car?" That was the moment something in me cracked. Not exploded, cracked. Quietly, cleanly, like a fault line finally giving way after years of pressure. Because the thing is, this wasn't new. It just finally sounded as wrong as it always was. So I'm here asking strangers on the internet something I've been too afraid to ask myself. Is this normal? Or am I finally seeing clearly? I grew up with one primary parent after my other parent left when I was young. They eventually remarried, and my sibling came along not long after. From the outside, we looked like a pretty normal family. Roof over our heads, food on the table, holidays celebrated. No obvious abuse, no screaming matches every night. But from early on, there was a clear difference between how my sibling and I were treated. My sibling was fragile, sensitive, needed more. That's how it was always framed. They got more attention, more protection, more patience. If they cried, everything stopped. If they were upset, plans changed. I, on the other hand, was labeled independent. Low maintenance. The strong one. At first, that felt like praise. I wore it like a badge. I learned early that being easy made life smoother for everyone. My sibling got better schools because they needed the support. They got more freedom because they'd rebel otherwise. They got defended fiercely, even when they were clearly in the wrong. I got told I'd be fine. Looking back now, there were signs I brushed off because I didn't have a comparison point. I got sick a lot as a kid. Nothing dramatic, but frequent fevers, stomach issues, migraines. I was told constantly that I was exaggerating. "You're being dramatic. You're fine, stop whining. Other kids have it worse." Once I passed out at school. When they called my parent, they were annoyed I had caused a scene. I remember sitting on a plastic chair in the nurse's office for hours because they were busy. I got left places more than once. After school, after activities, once even at a hospital after a minor procedure. Each time, it was brushed off as a mistake. I learned not to make a big deal out of it. What sticks with me now is how differently emergencies were handled. If my siblings scraped their knee, there was panic. Ice packs, cuddling concern, sometimes even a doctor visit just in case. When I injured my arm badly enough that it swelled and turned purple, I was told to sleep it off. It turned out to be fractured. At the time, I internalized this as logic. They need help. I don't. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being a kid and became an extra adult. I babysat. I mediated arguments. I understood money stress and emotional strain long before I should have. I was expected to be flexible, understanding, and grateful. Praise only came when I was useful. "You're so mature. I don't know what I'd do without you. You never make things harder." Comfort came only after I proved I didn't need it. If I cried, it made things awkward. If I asked for reassurance, I was being needy. So I stopped asking. I don't remember being held when I was upset. I remember being told to calm down, so I didn't upset anyone else. I thought growing up would fix things. That once we were all adults, the playing field would level out. It didn't. My parent still interrupts me when I talk, especially if my sibling is around. My achievements are acknowledged briefly, then minimized or compared. Mental health struggles are dismissed as stress or overthinking. Meanwhile, my sibling's anxiety is treated with urgency and compassion. If my sibling has a problem, my parent drops everything. If I do, it's scheduled, deferred, sometimes forgotten. I started to wonder, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, gnawing way, if something happened to me, would they even notice? And then something did. The car accident wasn't the first serious thing I've been through, but it was the one that stripped away my excuses. My parent arrived late to the hospital. They were annoyed about the drive and the parking situation. They asked about insurance before asking how I felt. At one point, they said, this is what happens when you rush. As if I'd done something wrong by existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then came that line, the one that won't leave my head. At least you weren't the one who died. No apology followed. No vaktrakin. It was said as fact, not comfort. I realized then that if I had died, the tragedy wouldn't have been me. It would have been the inconvenience, the mess, the disruption. I've spent weeks arguing with myself since then, telling myself I'm ungrateful, that other people have it worse, that my parent did their best, feeling guilty for even questioning it, still wanting, embarrassingly, painfully, for them to tell me I matter. But I can't ignore the pattern anymore. The consistent minimization, the emotional distance, the way my survival has always been treated as assumed, not cherished. So I'm asking you, Reddit, because I genuinely don't trust my own perspective anymore. Did my parent value my life? Or was I just there? I'm not trying to bash them. I'm not looking for validation or pity. I just need clarity. Because right now, all I feel is this quiet grief for something I don't think I ever had. Update. First, I want to say thank you. I didn't expect the response my last post got. I posted it late at night, half convinced I'd wake up embarrassed and delete it. Instead, I woke up to hundreds of comments, messages, and people gently, and not so gently, telling me things I wasn't ready to hear but probably needed to. A lot of you said the same words over and over again. This is neglect. You were emotionally parentified. Being the strong one isn't a compliment. At first, I resisted that framing. Neglect felt like too strong a word. My parent fed me, clothed me, showed up to school events sometimes. I kept thinking it wasn't that bad. But as I kept reading, something uncomfortable started happening. People were describing my life back to me with unsettling accuracy. The patterns, the roles, the way I minimized myself to keep the peace. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. One comment in particular stuck with me. Someone said, "You weren't loved less. You were needed less." And that's not the same thing. That sentence sat in my chest like a weight. I started replaying moments from my childhood and adulthood with a different lens. Times I brushed off. Times I blamed myself for being too sensitive. Times I told myself I was lucky for being independent. I realized how often I'd been praised not for who I was, but for how little I demanded. That realization pushed me to do something I'd avoided my entire life. Talk to my parent directly. I didn't go in angry. I didn't yell or accuse. I actually rehearsed what I wanted to say because I was terrified of being dismissed again. I told them I'd been thinking a lot about our relationship, that I felt like I'd always been expected to handle things on my own, that there were moments, medical emergencies, emotional crises where I felt invisible. I gave specific examples. I stayed calm. I was careful with my words. Their reaction was immediate and defensive. They sighed, crossed their arms, and said, "I don't know why you're doing this now." They told me I was rewriting history, that I'd always been dramatic, that I had a tendency to want attention when things weren't about me. At one point, they laughed, and said, "You really know how to make everything negative." I felt myself shrinking the way I always did. But this time, something was different. I didn't back down. I told them I wasn't trying to attack them. I just needed them to understand how these patterns affected me. That's when a mask slipped. They looked at me, genuinely confused, and said something that I don't think they realized was devastating. "You were easier." They explained it like it was obvious, like it was common sense. My sibling needed more attention, more reassurance, more protection. They were sensitive, reactive, fragile. I wasn't. Then came the sentence that finally answered the question I'd asked in my original post. "You didn't need me like they did." They said it kindly, comfortingly, even, like it was supposed to make me feel better. And for the first time in my life, I heard it clearly. I told them, quietly, "I didn't need you. I just learned not to show it." They didn't respond to that. Word got around faster than I expected. Apparently, my parent talked to other relatives about the conversation, framing it as me attacking them and dredging up the past. Some family members reached out privately. They told me they'd noticed the imbalance for years, but didn't feel it was their place to interfere. A few admitted they assumed I was fine because I always seemed fine. Others were less kind. I was told I was being cruel, ungrateful, that my parent did their best, and I should stop punishing them for it. One relative said, "You know how sensitive your sibling is. Why are you making this harder?" That question alone said more than they probably realized. My parent, meanwhile, leaned fully into the victim role. They told me I'd broken their heart, that they never knew they were such a terrible parent, that they felt attacked and unappreciated. They never asked how I felt. And strangely, I wasn't angry. I was grieving. What finally settled in wasn't rage. It was clarity. I realized I hadn't been unloved because I was unworthy. I had been ignored because I was capable, because I adapted, because I endured, because I made myself small and manageable and easy. And no one ever came back to check on the cost of that. I've started therapy since then. I've been journaling. I put a little distance between myself and my parent. Not dramatically, not as punishment, but because I need space to hear my own thoughts without being overwritten. For the first time, I'm not trying to convince them of my pain. I'm learning to believe it myself. I don't know what the future of this relationship looks like. I don't know if my parent will ever truly understand what they did or didn't do. But I do know this. I'm done gaslighting myself on their behalf. So yeah, you were right, Reddit, and I wish you weren't. Final update. It's been a few months since I wrote my last update. Time has a strange way of smoothing edges while sharpening clarity. At first, I thought the clarity would be painful. And in some ways it was. But mostly it was freeing. During these months, I created distance. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. I needed space to process the years of patterns without someone constantly reminding me how overly sensitive I supposedly was. I journaled, went to therapy, and paid attention to my own reactions instead of constantly second-guessing myself. And then, inevitably, my parent reached out, not with an apology, not with acknowledgement of the harm, but with a request. They needed help with something that required my time and energy. They wanted me to step in and restore the status quo, the way things had always been, me quietly accommodating their needs, my sibling at the center, and my own feelings quietly shoved aside. I did something I'd never done before. I said no, calmly, clearly, without justifying myself beyond the bare truth. I explained that I needed space and that I was no longer willing to be the default emotional support that had always been expected of me. The reaction was immediate. Shock, anger, guilt-tripping. After everything I've done for you, is this how you repay me? You're tearing this family apart. I listened. I stayed calm. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just listened and repeated my boundary. I needed distance. I needed to prioritize my well-being. And then I hung up. For the first time, I realized that the answer I had been seeking all those years wasn't going to come from them. The words didn't matter. It wasn't about apologies or reassurances. It was about their actions, or more accurately, the consistent absence of actions that truly mattered. Looking back, it's clear. My parent didn't value my inner life. They valued convenience, peace, appearances. They were invested in the version of me that could adapt, tolerate, and remain easy. Everything else, my fear, my pain, my needs, didn't matter to them. That realization stung. And then it didn't. Because I finally understood that the question I had been asking my whole life was wrong. I didn't need to ask whether they valued my life. That had never been the point. The real question was, do I value my life? And the answer is yes. I've spent these months building a life that reflects that truth. I've nurtured relationships with people who see me, who respect my boundaries, and who show up. Not because they have to, but because they care. My chosen family is small, imperfect, but present. And I no longer feel the crushing need to chase approval from someone who couldn't see me. I've learned that boundaries aren't punishments. They're declarations of worth. That saying no isn't cruelty, it's self-respect. That freedom isn't about cutting people off entirely, but about cutting away the expectation that your value has to be validated by someone who will never truly see it. And so, quietly, I've won. Not with drama, not with confrontation, not with revenge, just by being consistent, calm, and intentional in valuing my own life. I stopped asking someone who couldn't see me to prove that I was worth seeing. And for the first time in years, I feel fully, completely, undeniably seen.
Thanks for watching Story Scroll. Hit that bell and stay tuned for the next story that will move your heart.